The Vicari Dominion had conquered 43 star systems in just 11 years. Every victory followed the same ruthless formula: find the weakest target, strike without mercy, move on before anyone could fight back. It had never failed. When Dominion scouts discovered Station Omega-7, they believed they had found humanity's weakest link. The station drifted at the ragged edge of the Kepler belt like a relic everyone else had forgotten. Scarred by decades of micrometeor impacts, its hull was a patchwork of mismatched metal plates and emergency repairs. Its communications array barely produced a signal. Half its external lights were dark. From a distance, it looked less like a military outpost and more like a dying machine stubbornly refusing to shut down. To the Vicari strategists, the conclusion was obvious: capture Omega-7, break humanity's frontier, let the rest of their empire collapse under the weight of fear. It was the same strategy that had crushed 43 civilizations before them. The only mistake was assuming humans abandoned anything that still had one fight left in it, almost embarrassingly so. Long-range Vicari probes showed a skeleton crew of maybe 200 humans, minimal weapon signatures, a single docking ring, 3 outdated point defense turrets that hadn't been upgraded in what their intelligence suggested was 15 years. Fleet Commander Voskarath studied the holographic display of the station from the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, surrounded by a battle group of 60 warships. "This is what stands between us and the inner colonies," he said. His second-in-command, Sub-Commander Dreth, tilted his head. "Humans placed it here strategically. It controls the only stable jump corridor into their Kepler colonies. Then it is a gate," Voskarth said, "and gates can be broken." He wasn't wrong about that. What he was wrong about, catastrophically, historically fatally wrong about, was what the gate was actually for. Because Station Omega-7 wasn't guarding the corridor, it was the corridor. 3 days before the Vicari fleet arrived, a woman named Admiral Sarah Voss sat alone in Omega-7's command center and drank terrible coffee. She was 54 years old. She had short gray hair, a prosthetic left hand from a skirmish she never talked about, and the kind of patience that only comes from spending 20 years thinking about one problem. She had been thinking about the Vicari for 20 years. Her staff moved quietly around her. They had stopped asking her questions 2 days ago. They knew what was coming. They knew their jobs. Every single person on this station, all 212 of them, had volunteered for this assignment, knowing exactly what it meant. Not one of them had hesitated. Lieutenant Commander Reyes appeared at her elbow. 29 years old, brilliant, terrifyingly calm. Vicari fleet just crossed the outer marker. Admiral, 61 ships. They brought a siege formation. Voss nodded slowly. They did their homework. Their leadership is broadcasting a demand for immediate surrender. She looked at the message on the screen. It was thorough. She had to give them that precise terms. A deadline of 6 hours. A detailed list of what would happen to the station and its crew if the deadline was not met. She set down her coffee. "Send them our response." Reyes almost smiled. The standard one. The standard one. The message that went out to Fleet Commander Voskarath was 3 words long. "Come and take it." On the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, Voskarath read the message twice. Then he laughed, a short, sharp sound that carried genuine amusement. He had expected fear, pleading perhaps an attempt to negotiate. 3 words. "Brave," Dreth said carefully. "Foolish," Voskarath replied. "Begin the siege formation. Standard approach. I want that station intact enough to use as a forward base." He paused. "Do not underestimate the humans. They are stubborn, but stubborn is not the same as capable." He would think about that distinction a great deal in the days that followed. The Vicari fleet moved in like a closing fist. 61 ships arranging themselves in a perfect sphere around Omega-7, cutting off every approach vector, every escape route, every possible avenue of reinforcement. It was textbook siege doctrine. It had worked 43 times before. What none of their scans picked up, what no Vicari sensor in the fleet detected, was the 240 kilometers of dormant hardware sleeping in the asteroid field surrounding the station. Cold, unpowered, invisible, waiting. Admiral Voss watched the fleet lock into position on her display and felt something settle in her chest. Not fear, not even anticipation, satisfaction. "They're in," Reyes said quietly. "Yes," she said, "they are." She picked up her coffee again and took a long, slow sip. "Now we close the door." The first 6 hours of the siege went exactly as Voskareth expected. He sent precision fire at Omega-7's point defense turrets. All 3 were destroyed within the first 40 minutes. The humans made no attempt to repair or replace them. He took this as a sign of limited resources. He was right about that. He was wrong about what it meant. He attempted to jam the station's communications. The jamming worked perfectly. No signals in, no signals out. He took this as successful isolation of the target. He was right about that too. What he did not understand, what his entire fleet did not understand, was that Omega-7 didn't need to communicate with anyone. Everything Admiral Voss needed was already here. Had been here for 2 years, placed carefully, quietly, without ceremony by a construction project, officially listed in Earth's military budget as Belt Infrastructure Maintenance Kepler Sector. Nobody reads budget line items. The Vicari certainly hadn't. At hour 7, Voskarath made his first serious move. He detached 12 ships from the sphere formation and sent them forward to begin hull-breaching operations. The standard method for taking a station intact. Specialized ships that would anchor to the hull, cut through it, and deliver boarding parties directly into the interior. The 12 ships crossed the 40,000-kilometer threshold. Nothing happened. They crossed the 20,000-kilometer threshold. Still nothing. Boss Karath watched with something approaching satisfaction. The humans were simply going to let them come. Perhaps they had accepted the inevitable. Perhaps at 8,000 kilometers, the asteroid field woke up. Not all at once. That was the first thing that made it terrifying. It didn't explode into action like a panicked defense. It was systematic, methodical, the way a professional does a job. The first thing the Vicari ships saw on their sensors was mass. Hundreds of objects previously registering as inert rock, now emitting power signatures, drive signatures, weapon signatures. "What?" Dreth began. The first rail strike hit a Vicari cruiser at 47 kilometers per second. The cruiser did not survive. In 30 seconds, 4 of the 12 advanced ships were destroyed. Not damaged, not disabled, destroyed. Hit by kinetic impactors moving so fast that the ship's shields had no meaningful time to respond. The other 8 broke formation immediately, scattering back toward the main fleet. 2 more were hit during the retreat. 6 ships returned out of 12. In 30 seconds, the bridge of the Eternal Dominion was very quiet. "Report," Voskarath said, his voice completely flat. The tactical officer's hands were moving fast across his console. "The asteroid field is not an asteroid field, Commander. The objects are artificial, disguised as rock. We count a pause, a long pause. We count over 400 individual units, mixed weapons platforms, railguns, missile batteries, point defense clusters." Another pause. "And something else. Something we don't have a classification for." "Show me." The display updated. Scattered throughout the field were larger objects still disguised as asteroids. But now that the fleet sensors were actively looking, clearly artificial, long, cylindrical, heavily armored. "What are those?" Dreth asked. Nobody answered, because nobody knew. Inside Omega-7, Lieutenant Commander Reyes looked at Admiral Voss. "They've identified the hammers. How many? Best guess." "They can see about 30% of them." Voss nodded. "Good. Let them look." Boss Karath spent 2 hours reorganizing his thinking. He was a methodical man. It was his greatest strength, and though he didn't know it yet, his greatest weakness in this particular situation. He understood the trap intellectually. This station was bait. The field was the real defense, and humanity had spent considerable time and resources building it without his intelligence services noticing. He respected that. He even admired it slightly. But he still had 61 ships, now 55, and they were still in siege formation around a station with 200 people on it. His weapons outranged most of what the field had shown him. He had options. What he decided to do was methodical, calculated, and completely reasonable given the information he had. He pulled his fleet back to 80,000 kilometers and began long-range bombardment of the weapons platforms, picking them off one by one from outside their effective range. It worked for 40 minutes. It worked beautifully. 14 platforms destroyed, minimal return fire, no Valkyrie casualties. Then Admiral Voss activated the second layer. There is a concept in human military history called a defense in depth. It means you don't put all your strength at one line. You put strength everywhere layered, so that when an enemy breaks through one line, they find another line waiting, and then another, until they are deep inside your territory, exhausted and surrounded, and they realize too late that they were never breaching a defense. They were walking into a stomach. The second layer of Omega-7's trap was not in the asteroid field. It was under it. 56 autonomous combat drones, each the size of a large ground vehicle, had been anchored to asteroids at the very bottom of the field, too deep for Valkyrie long-range sensors to detect clearly. They were not disguised as rock. They were simply small, cold, and patient. When Voss Karth pulled his fleet back to 80,000 kilometers to begin long-range bombardment, he unknowingly repositioned his ships into the drone's optimal engagement range. The drones launched, not at the warships, at the engines. 4 Valkyrie capital ships lost engine capability in the first drone wave. They didn't explode. The drones were designed to disable, not destroy. An exploding ship is gone. A disabled ship stays in place. And a disabled ship in a battle zone is a problem for every other ship around it. Voss Karth found himself managing a tactical nightmare. 51 combat-capable ships, 4 drifting hulks, waves of drones targeting his propulsion systems, and an asteroid field full of railguns that punished any ship that came within 30,000 kilometers of the station. He was still winning on paper. He still had more firepower than anything in front of him. But he was no longer controlling the tempo of the battle. Admiral Voss was. She sat in the command center of Omega-7 and watched the Valkyrie fleet with the detached focus of someone who had planned this engagement in simulation roughly 1,200 times. She had run every version, every response the Valkyrie commander could make. She had modeled every adaptation, every tactical adjustment. There was one move she was waiting for. Reyes appeared beside her. He's pulling the fleet into a tighter formation, concentrating firepower to punch through the field in a single corridor. There it is, Voss said quietly. Should I activate the hammers? She looked at the display for a long moment. The Valkyrie fleet was compressing, ships moving closer together, presenting a concentrated mass of firepower. It was the correct move, given their information. It was what she would have done. It was also exactly what the hammers were built for. Not yet, she said. Let them commit. Voss Karth committed everything to the corridor push. It was a good plan, a focused burn through a single gap in the weapons field, overwhelming the platforms in that sector through sheer volume of fire, then pushing the fleet through the gap to close engagement range, where the station's lack of point defense would be decisive. He assembled 43 of his best ships into a tight spear formation and drove it at Omega-7's northern approach at maximum combat speed. The platforms in that sector returned fire. Some were destroyed. The Valkyrie fleet pushed through, taking hits, losing 2 more ships, but pushing through. They were 25,000 kilometers from Omega-7 when the hammers fired. The hammers were officially designated as kinetic delivery systems, long-range autonomous, KDSLA, in Earth's procurement documents. They were large because they had to be. The projectiles they launched were not missiles. They were not energy weapons. They were solid tungsten rods 2 meters in diameter, 12 meters long, accelerated to a significant fraction of the speed of light through a magnetic launch tube 4 kilometers long. Each rod carried no explosives. It didn't need any. Physics did the work. The first hammer fired at a very battlecruiser at the center of the spear formation. The targeting solution had been calculated 6 minutes earlier. The rod crossed the distance in 0.4 seconds. At that velocity, the impact energy was approximately equivalent to a small nuclear weapon. The battlecruiser ceased to exist. In the next 11 seconds, 7 more hammers fired. Each one had been pre-targeted based on the fleet's predicted position during the corridor push. positions that Voss's methodical, predictable tactics had delivered with almost perfect accuracy. 8 ships gone, not destroyed in the conventional sense, simply struck by physics so violent that the word destroyed felt inadequate. The Vakari spear formation broke apart. On the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, an alarm was sounding that Voss Karth had never heard in combat before. He had heard it in training simulations. It was the mass casualty alert triggered when sensor systems detected the simultaneous destruction of multiple capital ships. "Report," he said. His voice was steady. He was proud of that. 8 vessels lost, Commander, the weapons that hit them. The tactical officer stopped. "Report," Voskarth said again. "We have no countermeasure for what hit them. The projectiles moved too fast for our point defense to engage. We had less than half a second of warning." A pause. "We believe there are more of those weapons in the field. We cannot determine how many." Voskarth looked at the display. He had arrived with 61 ships. He had 43 combat-capable vessels remaining. He had been here for 11 hours. He had not reached the station. For the first time in his career, Fleet Commander Voskarath felt something he didn't have a word for in his language. Humans would have called it the specific stomach-dropping feeling of realizing you have been completely, thoroughly, expertly outplayed. "Options," he said. "Silence. Someone give me options." Dreth spoke carefully. "We can attempt to withdraw through the corridor we entered on." Voskarth looked at him. Then he looked at the display. The entry corridor, the one his fleet had come through when the field was dormant and silent and pretending to be empty space. "Is the entry corridor clear?" he asked the tactical officer. A long pause. "No, Commander. The platforms have repositioned. The entry corridor is covered." Of course it was. Admiral Sarah Voss had one rule about traps. A trap that kills everything in it is a weapon. A trap that demonstrates something is a message. And humanity at this particular moment in its relationship with the Vakari Dominion needed to send a message far more than it needed 43 more destroyed ships. She opened a communication channel to the Vakari fleet. It took them 6 minutes to respond. She waited. She was good at waiting. When Voskarath's face appeared on her screen, she studied him carefully. He was composed. Whatever he was feeling, he had put it somewhere internal and locked it away. She respected that. "Admiral," he said. His translation unit rendered the word precisely. "Commander," she said, "I'm going to explain something to you, and I need you to listen carefully because I'm only going to say it once, and I need you to bring it home to the people who sent you." He said nothing. She took that as permission to continue. "You have 43 ships," she said. "You entered this system with 61. You have been here 11 hours, and you have not come within 8,000 kilometers of this station." She let that sit. "I have enough hammers left in this field to destroy every ship you have remaining. You cannot see them all. You cannot target them all. Your point defense cannot stop them." Another pause. "I want you to understand that I have not fired those hammers. That is a choice I am making right now." In this moment, Voskarth's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. "What do you want?" he asked. "I want you to go home," Voss said simply. "I want you to tell the Dominion what happened here. I want you to describe this station, this field, these weapons. I want you to be honest about the numbers." She leaned forward slightly. "And I want you to understand that this is not our most defended position. This is a station we built specifically for you to attack. Everything you see here, the platforms, the drones, the hammers, we built it knowing you were coming, knowing what formation you would use, knowing what tactics you would employ." She let him think about that. "We have been watching you for a long time, Commander. You conquer through predictability. You find the weak point and you push. You have done it 43 times and it has always worked." She sat back. "It worked here too. We gave you a weak point. You found it. You pushed." A pause. "And now you're inside a trap that was built 2 years ago to hold exactly 61 ships." Voskarth was quiet for a very long time. "You let us in," he said finally. "Not a question." "We invited you in," Voss corrected. "There's a difference. What happened next would be studied in Vakari militaries for decades." Voskarath, to his considerable credit, did not make additional tactical errors. He did not attempt a desperate assault. He did not call Voss's bluff, correctly understanding that there was no bluff to call. He issued a fleet-wide order, gathered his 43 remaining ships into a careful formation, and began a slow, methodical withdrawal through the one corridor the hammers had left open. Because, of course, Voss had left a corridor open. She had planned for that too. As the Vicari fleet retreated, every surviving ship passed within clear visual sensor range of something that had been invisible during the approach. Attached to the outer hull of Omega-7, clearly visible now, were markers, plaques, 43 of them, each one etched with the name and designation of a Vicari warship that had attacked a human target in the previous 11 years. None of those ships had survived their engagements. Every single Vicari captain who passed the station saw their fleet history written on its hull and understood what they were looking at. A monument not to victory, to memory, to the meticulous, patient 20-year project of a species that did not forget, did not rush, and did not build traps until the trap was perfect. The last Vicari ship cleared the outer marker at 154T32 station time. Admiral Voss's staff erupted, not the kind of explosion that comes from adrenaline and relief, though that was part of it. It was the release of 2 years of preparation of everyone on the station living with the knowledge of what they were here to do and simply waiting day after day to do it. Reyes was grinning so hard it looked like it hurt. 43 ships withdrew, 0 pursuit capability. Their fleet won't be reformed for at least 8 months. Good, Boss said. Should I send the after-action report to command? Give me an hour. She stood up, stretching. I want to write the summary personally. She walked to the observation window. A small thing, really, just a strip of reinforced glass along one wall of the command center. She looked out at the asteroid field, which had gone quiet again. Platforms powering back down, drones returning to anchor positions. To a passing ship, it would look like an empty, unremarkable belt of rock. That was the point. She thought about the message she was going to write to Earth Command. She had been composing it in her head for 2 years, adjusting it, refining it. She knew what the first line would be. They came. They saw exactly what we wanted them to see. They did exactly what we expected them to do. The station held. She thought about the 43 plaques on the hull outside. She thought about the Vicari captains who had read them. She thought about the report that Voss Karth was writing right now on the retreating flagship, and what it was going to say, and who was going to read it. Good. She wanted them to read it. She wanted every fleet commander in the Dominion to read it, and to sit with it, and to think about what it meant when a species doesn't react to you, doesn't panic, doesn't scramble, just watches you, studies you, builds something specific and patient and invisible, and waits as long as it takes. The Vicari had conquered 43 star systems by finding the weak point. Today, they had learned something important. Sometimes the weak point finds you. 3 months later, the Vicari Dominion submitted a formal request for diplomatic negotiations with the Terran Republic. The delegation arrived at Earth with a full honor guard and no weapons. The negotiations were held at a location of humanity's choosing,